Hi everyone, my name is King Ivy and this is Introduction to Excel Basics. In today's lesson, which is the fifth lesson of 8 lessons, is conditional formulas. So building off what we covered off in the last lesson set, which was basic formulas, we'll be basically covering off how do you use formulas that have conditions. And conditions are particularly important where you have multiple scenarios. And a great example is if you're trying to figure out the sales tax for a particular item or a particular series of items. Sometimes the sales tax is going to be different if it's Quebec, for example, versus Ontario versus in the US. So you want to be able to apply those various conditions based off the various scenarios. So let's start with something really basic. Let's go over to column L. And basically what I'm going to do is that maybe I know that the Toronto region hyperinflates their capacity, and the fact that their capacity that they're showing is not really their true capacity. So we want to apply a condition where we decrease wherever the value that they provide for the Toronto region, it's basically multiplied by 90%, which basically means decrease it by 10%. So we're going to go view, freeze pane's top row, just so that we can have a view. So we're going to use this function called if. And if is a very common logical statement used in many different scenarios. So we're basically it's going to ask us for our logical test. So we're going to go over to C2 and says if C2 equals quotation Toronto region, then what do I want to do if that statement is true? If that statement is true, I want to take the capacity, times it by 0.9. Otherwise, if it's not true, basically it's not Toronto region, I want to take it at its face value. So what you'll see here is now if we drag it down, you'll see that where it's Toronto region, in this case right here, it has decreased the value of the capacity to 90% of it. So very important statement to use. Perhaps I want to count if there's a certain scenario. For example, I want to count, so let's go to M1, let's go to M2 and say like, I want to know how many projects, so which is a projects is a row, have a capacity greater than 50 kilowatts, 50 mega kilowatts. So one way of doing it is you could sort it, count it, you could filter the data greater than count it, but we can also use a formula. So for example, we use this formula called COUNTIF, and COUNTIF asks you for the range that you want to look at. So in this case, we want to look at all the capacities, which is in this area, and then the criteria. So if we're dealing with numeric values, sorry, my keyboard is in multiple languages, so just have to adjust that. So then if we want to do it greater than 50, we'll have to put quotation greater than 50. And then what you'll see here is there's 21 that have a capacity greater than 50. We can also change that to 30, 300, and the various different scenarios. We can also do where we can go count if, and our range will be here. I basically want to know, you can also do it based off of text. So for example, you can do if the criteria is approved and how many projects have been approved. So very useful and handy. You can also do sum if. So sum if is a little bit more tricky. So in this case, we want to sum if, for example, I want to know just the total that are approved. So I'll go sum if, put an A and say approved. which is the criteria, and then sum if, then you want to sum your column. So basically it goes, what's the column that you, or basically the set of cells that you want to look at? What's the condition to say whether or not we include or exclude that calculation from the sum? In this case, then we go over to the corresponding row that has the values that we want to sum. So you'll see that of the approved projects, this is the power capacity. So very useful formula. Perhaps we want to have multiple scenarios. So we'll sum ifs. I want to know if the application is approved, and as well whether it's it's solar. So basically I have two conditions. So is the project approved and is it solar? If so, tell me what the power capacity is. Oh, yep, sorry, I made a mistake here. So you're actually supposed to identify the sum range, which is opposite of what we did before, and then provide the two criteria. So I get for not reading the instructions. So you'll see here, essentially what we need to do first is determine what's the range of values I want to sum, in this case capacity, if it meets these following conditions. So you can put more than 2, you can put 10, 3, 15, etc., etc. And you can do the same thing on count if, for example. So literally we can just change this all and say count if instead of sum ifs. In this case, it's the criteria ranges. There's no sum range, but essentially you get the drift. So very similar. The only thing is that we change it from sum to count and remove the sum range. So another one that you want to do is sometimes the calculations go haywire, right? Like sometimes it doesn't work out. So for example, a common example would be if you were, what we haven't covered is whether or not all the provinces are on this particular region, or all the cities are on this region mapping. Actually, let's go down a slightly different route. What we're gonna do is add a row, and we're gonna use a couple different functions here. We're basically gonna say, so what we're gonna do is figure out where the dash is in the cell. So if we go equals find, so what do I want to find? I want to find a dash within this cell. So if we go like that and then scroll down, what you'll see is that sometimes it actually provides us like with this error, right? And error is not a very good way of seeing the data. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use this function called if it's an error, basically say no dash exists. So if we were to copy and paste this to here, it transfers from an error to a message, and this can be particularly useful, especially as you're analyzing your data and there are errors, or you're looking up a certain value and it doesn't exist and you want to change it to 0. That also gives you the option there. So that's it for today's lesson on conditional formatting. Ifs can be highly complex and very useful tools. So I'll be providing some quizzes and some additional lesson material where you can use to practice on ifs. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.